Hello, I'm Phil Cubeta, the Sallie B and William B. Wallace Chair in Philanthropy at the American College. And I'm here with Steve Beck, who is the founder and chief executive of Spring Hill Equity Partners. And maybe you could begin by telling us a little bit about what your organization does.
Sure, Phil. It's good to be here with you. Spring Hill Equity Partners is essentially a private equity fund, like a lot of other private equity funds. We invest in private companies. But the focus of Spring Hill Equity, which may be a little bit different, is our focus is on providing growth capital and support to small growing businesses in East Africa. And the intention, again, like most private equity funds, is to make money for our investors, but it's also to have a significant measurable benefit on low-income households. So it's a social venture capital or social private equity fund.
You know, that is such a leading edge part of the capital markets. How did you get to that point in your life where that was the logical thing for you to be doing?
I started out, I studied international development as an undergrad on the West Coast. International relations, economics, like a lot of idealistic people, this was in the late 70s, early 80s, wanting to save the world, change the world, etc. And then I did graduate work in the same area at the London School of Economics in London. And so I had this sort of academic training. But at the end of the day, I got a job in business. So I basically went into strategy consulting, and I spent 20 years helping chief executives of Fortune 200 companies decide where to play and how to win. And typical sort of couple of strategy firms, I ended up running these firms out of London. And I had this wonderful opportunity in 2002 to take a little bit of a career break. I took a leave of absence from my firm in London and moved back here to the States to help start up and run a company called Geneva Global. Geneva is a philanthropic intermediary company. So really what this was doing was applying investment discipline to grant making. The idea was to take all the disciplines of the investment world, think of philanthropy, think of grant making as an investment. The return on that investment, of course, is to change lives, to solve problems and so on. And we built the organization up. We brokered about $85 million of grant capital, often to local initiatives in poor countries in Africa, Latin America, Eastern Europe, and so on. And along the way of doing that, so I spent 7 years, I guess in total, 5 years full-time, helping to build this organization, learning about professional grant making to spur development in the areas of health, education, and so on in poor countries. And what I realized in that process was, if you like, the dangers and limitations of grant making. The danger being that philanthropy, often a lot of philanthropy ends up being about us. It's sort of feeding our need to be needed.
Yeah.
It's this, and it can create a dependency. Well-intentioned philanthropy often still creates a dependency. And the thing that we discovered is, the way to get money is to be needy.
Interesting.
And it makes me feel better because I'm saving you, I'm solving these problems and so on. And so that dependency is sort of a vicious circle that gets created there. The limitations of philanthropy that I saw up close, and I think we were doing a good job, we were actually seeing lives change, but these programs that we were granting to, the best programs, of course, when they ran out of money, needed more money.
Right.
And so there was essentially a lack of sustainability and scalability of these programs. And maybe I can best illustrate this with an example that's as clear as a bell. I visited a program that we had granted to, a multi-year grant program in the Lake Volta region of Ghana.
Okay.
The program was really to address the problem of human slavery and trafficking. So what was happening in that region is that little kids, aged kind of 7, 8 years old, were being either sold or taken into the fishing industry. And they were used to dive to clear the nets that would get caught on the floor of this man-made lake that hadn't been cleared properly, because what the fishermen were doing is just dragging for tilapia. And so kids would die. They were working, ridiculous hours and so on. And so the programs that we were funding were fighting this problem. They were rescuing kids. They were trying to get legislative reform. They were trying to get the kids back in school and so on. But looking at that program and visiting the program, as effective as it was a little bit like filling the bathtub up with the plug out.
Right.
Because the reason those kids were there in the first place was poverty.
Right.
And so I thought to myself, well, how are we going to really address more than the symptoms of this problem?
They were sold by their parents?
Sold or sort of tacitly given into the fishing industry because the kids couldn't, this was maybe the youngest of 6 kids, 7 kids, couldn't afford really to properly feed or educate him.
Right.
So maybe I want to believe the lie that he's going to be taken care of. And so often they weren't even sold. And the issue that we saw there, therefore, was, look, there's a need to invest in an economic engine or a set of economic engines in these places where parents would have jobs,
right,
where there's income, there's some economic dynamism in that place that would provide employment so that those parents could care for their own families.
Right.
And so that was the sort of, seeing that over and over again, feeling like, well, okay, there's something to be done here to use all that business training that I had for 20 years, combined with some of this experience of international philanthropy and some distant, academic training I had, to say, well, I think there's something we can do here, which is to apply all the business discipline to invest in a good business, so it's going to make money, it's providing needed products and services, but these businesses are operating in places of poverty.
Right.
So we're really, I was passionate about seeing an impact on the poor,
right,
but in a sustainable and therefore scalable way. And the thing about a good business is it's inherently scalable. The profits that it generates helps it to grow. And so really that's kind of the hopefully not too long answer to the question, which is Spring Hill was really founded to invest in businesses that were going to have a significant scalable impact on low-income households, either through the products and services that they provide or through creating employment at scale in low-income communities.
Do you think it's working as a business, and can you tell us a story of how it's working for the people in Africa?
Yeah, it is working as a business. I mean, it's a new asset class. It's actually not even an asset class, let's face it. It's sort of right there on it's the start of a movement, I think. People are calling it impact investing. Okay. So raising capital into this kind of vehicle has been challenging because it can look not commercial enough to the people who are interested in short-term profit maximization, and it looks too commercial to the philanthropic person, right? So we can, it's a challenge in terms of raising the capital.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have raised some capital, we've made some investments, and to give you, an example or two. So one actually is a deal we're diligencing right now, so I'm hopeful we'll make this investment this quarter, is a business that produces and distributes solar-powered LED lighting.
Right.
And also the ability to charge your mobile phone. So what happens in sub-Saharan Africa is very few people are on an electricity grid. So literally the hundreds of millions of people are without electricity. And what they do for light is they burn open flame kerosene lanterns in their homes, which are small. Right, so you've got, apart from the respiratory ailments and the fire hazard and so on with kids kind of around this flame that's burning, burning kerosene in the home, people are spending $100 a year on kerosene, and that may be 20% of their annual income. So imagine, you're spending 20% of your annual income on energy, an energy source that's not very good for you. So this company produces and distributes a solar panel that's smaller than the piece of paper here on the table. It's indestructible, and it connects to a 4-setting LED light. And it also will charge your mobile phone. So again, people don't have electricity. There is a mobile phone for every other man, woman, and child in Africa. So it's a great productivity tool. But how do you charge it if you don't have electricity? You go pay for it to be charged every other day. So there's that expense as well. So this essentially allows a household to be self-sufficient for their basic energy needs. And that's, this product, hopefully that will distribute, to millions of households. But it's a good business. I mean, we're projecting, a good return on capital from that investment in that business. We've invested in a chain of private schools for the poor in Kenya. So these are schools, private schools, think of charter schools, but operating in the slum areas around Nairobi. And essentially it's a franchise model. Parents pay $3.75 per month for their children. There's an accountability between the parents and the school, right? Because if they're not getting a good education, parents aren't going to send them, and the school's going to go bust and go out of business. So these are for-profit schools. There's about a 10% margin we see in this business. But the cool thing about this is the kids are getting an education whereby they're testing at 100% better than the so-called free public education that they're passing up to go to the school. So their reading and arithmetic scores are 100% better than the public school system, which after all isn't free because you have to pay for school uniforms, you have to pay desk fees, you have to pay exam fees, and so on.
Steve, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
And we'll continue this in our next segment with Steve.